real conversations, and some hard truths. Gangs, drugs, and guns. Giving a voice to those willing to sacrifice. We have stories that need to be told. We have lessons that need to be taught. Protect and serve. Welcome to The Quiet Professional. Hey, welcome back, everybody. Nathan Romas with you. Today is a discussion focused on the mind, trauma, and a topic I've yet to find much information on, death. For that, I have Dr. Shauna Springer here. Dr. Springer goes by the nickname Doc, which we'll get into the significance of during our conversation. But she's a Harvard graduate who has become a trusted doc to U.S. military warfighters. Doc Springer is a best-selling author and one of the world's leading experts on psychological trauma, military transition, suicide prevention, and close relationships. She is the chief psychologist for Stella, where she works on new and innovative treatments for psychological trauma. Her work has been featured in numerous media outlets. There was a massive list when I was looking through this, but some of them are from CNN to NBC, Forbes, Business Insider, Military Times, Washington Post, and Psychology Today. And lastly, where I was introduced to her work, she is the co-author of Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. I recently had the other half of that story, Michael Sugru, on the podcast recently. So welcome, Doc.
Thanks, Nathan. It's good to be here.
We were just saying offline before we started this, just talking about kind of the things you're involved in. I mean, all the things I listed there, that's like a quarter of what I could have read off. You got a lot of projects on the go. You're involved in a lot of different organizations. It's quite the resume.
Thank you. Yeah, I always get a little embarrassed about the bio stuff. I'm all out on this mission.
Mm-hmm.
And, as chief psychologist for Stella, that's a huge part of my role to really, I see that organization as the cutting edge of really trauma care in terms of post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. And so, we have about 40 clinics across the US, Australia, and Israel. And
oh, wow.
And that's really my primary focus these days is we've treated about 7,500 people since 2020, launched just before the pandemic started. And, now we have around 40 clinics. So that's a big part of my focus. But I also have recently added lead psychological advisor for Magnus Works, which is this really cool, responsive app for first responders. And we're developing a lot of insights around things people can do to, stay healthy on the job for the long term. So Those are a couple recent roles that are taking quite a bit of my time, but I love to stay active.
Yeah. Well, and certainly once I post this episode, I'll make sure any links or anything that you'd like posted, like we'll put it all out there so people can find all your work. But maybe we'll start at the beginning and you can kind of tell us about yourself, where you're from, and how you kind of got into this field of work.
Sure. Okay. I'm from a small beach town in Southern California. It was, before it was discovered, it was a sleepy little town that had a 4th of July parade and, AYSO soccer matches on the weekends. And then a bunch of people from Hollywood said, hey, this is a nice little beach town, and started kind of discovering the town, moving into it. And it changed a lot. Ended up going, to school with some of the child stars from, Hollywood, that people you would know probably from some movies, and kind of became part of that scene a little bit, in my younger years, but really always wanted to live in Northern California because I love California and I love the hiking trails up here in the Northern California area, and a little bit less of the focus on the image. It feels like a better cultural fit for me up here in Northern California. So lived in different time zones, went to college at Harvard back on the East Coast, lived there for a while, worked at Mass General Hospital, went to Florida for grad school, so lived in the South for a while, and then moved back to California, where I now have a number of interesting things that I get to do every day to support warriors and protectors and defenders.
Awesome. Well, what drove you into the world of psychology and talking about PTSD and the mind?
I think, it really goes back to high school. My dad would say, "Get off the phone, do your homework." Because I'd be having these long conversations with my friends and would just find myself in the role of kind of like an advisor on a lot of the sort of problems and issues that came up.
Yeah.
Like, for example, in the young years of like lots of relationship drama, I would be kind of the person they would go to about their relationship dramas and kind of talk them through and think about, who they were dating and things like that. I ended up in 2012, the same week my son was born, publishing a book on relationships called Marriage for Equals. And that book was about a decade of work that I did really focused on close relationships. And so that's definitely a big part of my focus, something that people don't tend to know about as much as the work I do with warriors and first responders and trauma. But I would say that relationships and then, trauma and the challenges that protectors and defenders face, those are kind of like my big three areas of focus across my career.
Okay. Well, and did you have any family or anybody in the military or policing that maybe you also could draw on and see some of the dynamic, like what they bring home or I don't know, their relationships with other people? Is there any of that in your life?
My father-in-law served in the Air Force, but that is not the reason why I went into this work. I met my husband in college, but that didn't really factor in. I think it was a little bit, it requires a little bit more explanation. So, nobody in my immediate family served in the military, but I was raised in a very military style,
Hmm.
and my parents were unconventional. And so a lot of the stuff I was exposed to in my early years, like imagine being at a school with like Hollywood stars, and yet every summer you're sent down to like South America by yourself to do work, on mission and in bed with different communities.
Oh, wow.
That was an example of many of the things that my parents did. The first trip I was 10 years old, they sent me down to Mexico City with a photo and said, find this family in the airport and be of service to them. And so my upbringing was really service focused and very disciplined. I mean, early morning runs, physical discipline, taking challenges, working through anxiety, all of that really made veterans feel like home to me when I first started working with them. So I'm in my residency year for my psychology doctoral degree, and I did a rotation at the Gainesville VA and started working with groups of veterans, and it just clicked. And then it was years later that my younger sister actually put it together for me. We were on a walk, and I said, I wonder why it is why we recognize like a commonality between us, even though I've never served in the military. And she said, well, it's because we were raised like we were in boot camp.
Yeah.
And it was the case, that was definitely resonated. And so I think warriors, I just feel like they feel like home to me. They always have. And so I wouldn't want to represent that I've served, but that is a population that will always be kind of a core part of my purpose.
Well, I think you still, maybe you're not serving on a front line in the sense of you're out there with the rifle and running around, but somebody has to take care of the people who are out doing that, right? So you're still serving, you're still in service. So it's a very important role because if they're not well, they're not going to go out and be able to function. And you don't want them to bring things home that also destroy their home life. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different ways that sort of warriorship can show up. To me, warriorship is about a bigger thing than, to your point, being on the front lines with a rifle. That is a type of warriorship. But to me, a warrior is someone who is clear on their values. Their values are service and sacrifice, and they are willing to make sacrifices and do things most people won't do in
mm,
the service of their values. And so when I take that definition, as you put it, it takes a different kind of courage to bring people back from war.
yeah.
And I see that as my place of service. I'm not an asset within the literal foxholes, but in the sort of valley of mental warfare, that's where I've created space for people to heal and developed a number of unique insights from my role as a doc in the military and first responder communities.
Maybe we'll kind of talk about your nickname. Maybe now's a good point because you brought it up. So where does that kind of come from? And this, just so people know, a bit of this was explained in Relentless Courage in the book.
Yeah.
But maybe you could tell us here for people who haven't actually read the book.
Yeah. So, I think of two types of providers that are out there serving protectors and defenders. There's doctors and there's docs, and the two are not the same thing. People who are doctors have spent a lot of time in school. And I did as well. I have a doctoral degree and a license to practice as a doctoral level psychologist, but it doesn't really tell you about the trust that I develop with my patients and the way that I support them and the way that I see them as brave and inherently capable, and the way that I want to come alongside them as a trusted doc. I really I didn't give myself that name, but it means a lot to me. It was given to me by many, many veterans. To begin with, some of my patients during my 8 years at the VA started calling me doc and really explaining the significance of that to me. They said, there's, doctors and we call them sir, and, they, have expertise. But then there's like these people with expertise that we call doc because we know that they will save our life. If there's any way to save our life, they'll get it done. And so I want to practice in the way that docs do in the military, in that like trusted, like corpsman kind of like way to come alongside my patients in that way. And so it's just become the way that people refer to me, to the place where if people call me Shauna, I start looking around for my husband. Nobody even calls me that anymore. It's just doc is kind of like my unofficial first name now. And I really feel honored by that because that is kind of putting into words how I want to approach my life's work and mission.
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, like, so I guess the biggest component, and you said it a few times, was trust.
Mhm.
So for people to open up and say something, they're going to have to trust you. I see that a lot with even the people that we deal with as police officers. We take them to the hospital and they get put into the mental health system. They have to talk to a doctor there. I imagine they don't really trust that person. They just kind of throw them before them and they either lie or just don't tell them anything, just sit there in silence. And then the doctor just kicks them out. So nobody's getting any help through that method. But is there a way to build trust quickly? Maybe I'm not sure if that's the right way to say it, but is there a quick way to build trust with someone who's just kind of placed in front of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think yes and no. It's very quick, almost instantaneous when you are the kind of person that's a warrior that they instinctively trust. I go into a lot of this in my previous book, Warrior: How to Support Those Who Protect Us, all about what a doc is and how to build the trust. But unless you are that person that's worthy of trust, they will pick up on who you are in a nanosecond.
Yeah.
It's it's a lifetime of who you are that comes through in a flash of a moment that tells them whether they can trust you or not. And when you go into a clinical space, there are all these like little micro behaviors and interactions that doctors and docs do differently,
Mm.
in terms of how they set up the interaction, where people sit in the room, how they start the conversation. You know, Basically, like, people can communicate, doctors will communicate. I outrank you.
Hmm.
I outrank you. I'm the expert in the room. And, you are a passive recipient of the skills that I have to heal you, evaluate you. I'm going to assess you. I'm going to see what the problem is. I'm going to give you a name for that problem and I'm going to treat you. And a doc really would have a different approach and they can pick up on that so quickly. So, unless you can back that up with genuine, who you are at core, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So it comes out of a whole kind of philosophy and approach, and really your very being is what they're picking up on.
I see that a lot in policing too. So when you deal with somebody, I guess a good example would be when I've had been a recruit training officer, and you bring in a recruit and they're brand new and they don't know what is going on, and if you get some really hardcore bad guy in front of them, they can tell who's new in the room just by the way you walk, the way you stand,
Yeah.
the way you talk. It's all the demeanor, like you said, all these little things that they pick up on. It's human instinct, I guess, to pick up on a lot of these things. They're reading the room. Even when you deal with informants and you're trying to cultivate somebody and say, hey, I want you to talk to me. I actually give a shit about what you're doing. You might be out murdering people, but I care. So there's different ways to talk to different people. It's a lot of knowing your audience,
Mhm.
I guess would be the best way to say it. But yeah, I kind of see what you're saying when you're talking about the doc versus doctor. You go to a walk-in clinic and they're just pumping people out and it's just the next person and they're just very process driven. Or you actually get a family doctor who you've seen multiple times and they come in and they have a conversation with you and you might talk about a whole bunch of things. You might even forget about half the things you were there to talk about. So
Yes.
it's a different relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I think with protectors and defenders, with police officers, for example, with warriors that, deploy, it it is vital that they can assess these micro behaviors and expressions of who someone is, what their intentions are, what their character is. Their life depends on it. Their life depends on it. So they have this ability, and then the training they receive hones the ability,
Mm.
and they can tell in less than a second whether it's a job or it's a calling.
Mhm.
And if it's a calling, and the system must be safe to support it. So you can't be a doc in a system that's unsafe. Like that's an important point to make. So you can care about somebody, you can have insights to help them heal and see their challenges differently. You can respect them fundamentally and come alongside them. But if the system isn't safe and there are consequences for them to open up and disclose what's going on, doesn't matter if you're a doc. So you got to have two systems. You got to have the internal system of who you are being safe, solid, reliable, with a kind of courage and a kind of mission for mental warfare. And then you have to have a system and a structure that supports that so that when they open up, there aren't any consequences for them professionally or personally, that
Mm.
it's truly a safe place. And so that is why I helped to establish Stella, because it has to be both. We have to bring forward the kinds of people, the docs, on my therapy team, or the physicians that can surround people with amazing innovation, in how they treat post-traumatic stress. But it's also got to be a system outside of, the typical systems where things get reported back and there can be consequences for people that say, hey, I need some help right now to get back online.
Is that like you're essentially a cog in the bigger machine of the whole system, right? Like you can take care of certain things, but if the rest of it doesn't really fit for that person, or like you're saying, there's consequences once they've taken part in one session or whatever it might be, then they don't have that trust in the rest of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, essentially, like you could have the most amazing healing session possible. And if you document that in a system that's unsafe, and somebody says, oh, this person has a diagnosis of this, or, struggle with self destructive thoughts. I just published an article on Police One about 5 common myths about suicide.
Hmm.
And I'm doing a series for the MagnusWorks app on the same topic because it's Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. We're taping, this podcast in September. And first responders have a high degree of suicidal ideation, thoughts, urges compared to most people, And so I talk about, why that is. That first responders have so many self-destructive thoughts. It makes perfect sense. Um, but it's also, if you document that in a system that doesn't get it and it has a consequence for that person, that's a problem. So you have to have, the person has to be safe and the system has to be safe. And that's why at Stella, we have a bunch of really skilled nurse practitioners. They do our comprehensive assessments because they can look at people, kind of like there are docs on the front line of assessment. What is going on with this person? And then they're documenting it within our Stella electronic record system, but it's not going back to a chain of command or something with the,
Okay.
the details of what people discussed. So that's why I mean, you kind of need both levels of safety. Your provider and your system both have to be aligned and safe.
Well, and I want to get onto topic of Stella at one point here, but just kind of going back a little bit to the article you were talking about. I want to say that's the one I was reading this morning. I was reading through a ton of stuff for you. There was some talk in there about possibly, I guess you could find things through blood work. You can see like PTSD or different things through blood work. Was that on that article?
Yeah, no, that's probably a different one than we're talking about. There's nothing, in that particular article about blood work, but that is a potential avenue for innovation is looking at biomarkers, and there are a few different groups that are looking at that. Um, we are actually doing a huge study right now with NYU,
Okay.
which is going to be the landmark study of the stellate ganglion block, which is
Hmm.
2 injections into the neck to reset the adrenaline system. And we are using pre and post fMRI. So brain scans, functional magnetic resonance imaging, will show us, we believe, that post-traumatic stress causes a change, an alteration, an injury. And you can see it on a brain scan if you have the right scan,
Yeah.
and you can treat and heal it. So that would be another example of a biomarker. There's also, the potential for kind of salivary markers in saliva to show kind of elevated functioning on some markers of trauma. And then you expand to TBI, traumatic brain injuries, and there's a number of other potential markers, visual, body secretions, response to certain stimuli that I think are going to come very clear in the next few years in terms of
Really.
which ones are the best for really helping us be more discerning.
I feel like once you start getting into those things, though, like when you're talking about trust, I think people are going to be. Do you think they're going to be scared to do any of that stuff?
Yeah.
That's kind of
Yeah.
like, boy, you can tell someone is, hey, in 10 years, you're going to have this. Well, now your insurance provider is just like, yeah, I ain't covering you anymore. I think people are going to be scared.
Yeah. I mean, right? You have to have a safe system
Hmm.
using these tools because there's going to be no conceal and cover anymore. It's not, no ability at some point in 10, 15 years to say, no, I'm not affected by all the traumas that I've been through, when a biomarker test will suggest that there are some effects, there are some injuries there. A brain scan could tell that there's an injury. Now, when you have a safe system, it's the best thing in the world because it's validating. It's taking this out of some mysterious, invisible wound kind of metaphor and saying, no, it's actually an injury. And for first responders, I would want them to know that special forces units are already way out there in terms of innovation. Like a lot of the stuff we do came out of work that's been done in special forces units where they kind of have a different perspective that, hey, if I'm going to be on this kind of kinetic environment deployment cycle, okay, I'm going to have an injury from seeing that much trauma
Mm.
and having my fight or flight system like always primed and ready to respond. So between deployments, if I can't kind of unspool from my combat deployment, then I get that addressed with a stellate ganglion block and it like resets my adrenaline system and gets me back to calm. And so in special forces units, like it's a go-to treatment, has been for a while between combat deployments. And there's no stigma because they see it as it's a biological injury. It's a predictable result of the service, my lifestyle and the way that I serve. And I just need to get it addressed.
Mm.
And so that's what I would want for first responders is let's just treat the injury before it kind of grows and builds and becomes, a crisis and you're losing your marriage and you're separated from your kids because it's like so bad at home and you're operational at work.
Yeah.
But when you get home, it's like miserable for everybody. That's what I see. And so that's why, creating a safe and confidential treatment experience makes this an incredible technology to change and save lives. But no, in the wrong hands, people are not going to want any kind of testing like that because it's going to be very threatening to their, potential, their livelihood, their identity, and all of that.
Well, who would not want a safe system? Like, where do you find the roadblocks? Is it insurance companies because they want to know, hey, I don't want to be paying out for all these people who have whatever issue it might be? Is it chain of command? Are they the ones who kind of throw up the blocks and say, like, I want to know everything about the people I'm commanding?
There's a lot of money out there to
Mm.
treat first responders, and it's by and large locked up um, using conventional treatments that are not getting the results people need. We are making some progress with some first responder departments. Recently, I'm starting to see some things kind of break through, and I always wonder, like, how bad does it have to get before people start accepting that they need to take care of their people proactively
Yeah.
and invest? And we're not talking about big figures in terms of comparing the cost of these innovative options with the things that are done currently. It's going to actually be much less expensive. So you compare, a procedure that takes one or two treatment sessions in the clinic and some short-term therapy follow-up with putting someone on medications they don't want to be on, with no off-ramp, and weeks, months, years of therapy, and then sidelining them on the workers' comp system.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make economic sense. It doesn't make people sense. And it's incredibly frustrating to see that status quo be maintained. But yeah, I think essentially until the cost is addressed as the barrier, until we start resourcing these innovative treatment options, that's where things are going to get tied up.
Yeah, and I think you see that on both the physical side and the mental health side.
Yep.
The For whatever reason, and I speak on this from more of a police angle, but just having the proper belt system with suspenders and different things and moving gear around, um, sometimes there's lack of foresight, and it's getting better now. And there's a lot of changes with our service, but you see at other police services, they're still wearing things that are killing their backs. And it's like,
Mm.
do they not think ahead and go, maybe if I just, say I paid $300 for this new belt,
Yeah.
and it might save a few backs, or I'm just going to say no, tough it out. And now you have people on leave
Right.
and you're paying a bill for them and they're not contributing, they're not working. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it just seems crazy.
Yeah. And they go into a tailspin when they get sidelined. It's one of the articles I wrote for, I don't know, I don't remember which one, but it was about how career athletes and first responders and warriors have kind of a similar issue when they have their full identity that's wrapped up in the work they do and the mission they're on, and they get sidelined suddenly with like a
Mm.
career ending injury. It can make them suicidal to get pulled out of their tribe, suddenly, feel irrelevant to the mission, be isolated, detached from everybody, in physical pain, and then they're being jerked around by a system that didn't really look out for them in the first place and isn't responding in the ways that it needs to. And again, that's why I believe we need to create and resource these safe spaces that are alternatives that provide a kind of care that actually addresses the issue and gets people well. So there's a lot of examples. A belt is a good one. For many years, the idea of wearing boots when you're running, right? For
Yeah.
physical ed, like having the right shoes, having the right running shoes with like cushioning and support
Yeah.
makes a huge difference in the long term. If you're pounding on your joints with the wrong support, you're going to have these predictable injuries. So it does happen on both the physical and mental sides, but it happens so much more on the mental sides that people are they're disconnected from seeing how they need to engage preventative and innovative care. But I can see some progress there. I think things will change in the next few years based on what I'm seeing now.
Well, that's good to hear. I know we see some of it in the policing world. Some people are taking some leadership and making some of those important changes. I wanted to ask because you had brought this up about like the imaging and what you can see on brain scans. What does PTSD and trauma look like compared, when you compare a healthy brain to somebody who's experienced a whole bunch of trauma?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, there's a few different changes, but the one that people usually kind of zero in is on the amygdala and the overactivity in the amygdala region of the brain as being associated with a heightened trauma response. There's a set of predictable symptoms that people have when they've been exposed to trauma that has not been addressed, that they have kind of a constant reactivity, a fight or flight
Okay.
state they often live in, where they are not sleeping and they are flooded by anxiety, irritability, surges of irritability that are out of proportion to the situation, agitation, um, hypervigilance, kind of always scanning the world for threat. Trauma, when it's not addressed, will leave people feeling like the world is not a safe place and other people can't be trusted. And that becomes somebody's kind of defensive default position. And that is associated with a sort of hyper reactivity and those kinds of symptoms that I mentioned,
Yeah.
which is often paired with a hyperactive amygdala on brain scan.
Okay. So do you think, well, and maybe just part of this would be information, and then I'd have a question at the end of this, but it's with the police services. I know some of them send their members for regular mental health checks. So they go see a psychologist or therapist. I'm not great with all the terms. There's so many jobs, but you go every couple years, depending on your position within the police service. Would something like a brain scan at that time, rather than just going in to talk about stuff, do you think a brain scan at that time, like, could they actually show, hey, this person is, they're saying one thing, but we're seeing another? Would that be possible?
Well, it goes back to our previous conversation. So, one of the articles I wrote for Police One a few months ago was about the ideal treatment program for first responders. And it starts with that safe place where they would get assessed by an outside group. Stella, we have the nurse practitioners that do those assessments outside of a cycle of evaluating people. So it's kind of similar in the military. The psychologists that are within the military serve a dual role. They have a mission to get people well, but they also have an evaluative mission to assess for troop readiness. And the issue is that a lot of times when those evaluations are done, you've got people with a lot of power
Yeah.
over your ability to deploy or stay on the job in the military. And there's kind of a similar thing that happens with first responders. So is the answer, to force somebody against their will to get a brain scan when the system isn't safe?
Hmm.
No. The answer must be have somebody that has created a safe system do the assessment and treat them. Just proactively treat them for what comes up and say, these are the people, we treated these people in various ways, that we've done an evaluation and they met criteria for treatments that we offer. We provided those and they've been treated, successfully treated. And, here we're returning them back to you to get back on the line.
Okay.
And that's how we do it in special forces is just proactive periodic treatments, but in ways that are stigma free. And people can go in and say, I need to get that treatment done and I'll get back on the line. So there has to be a similar model like that for first responders.
So with the company with Stella, the work that you do there, are you partnered with any military or law enforcement, or do people just seek out the treatments on their own and maybe it's covered through, whatever insurance they have?
Yeah, no, like I said, we're making progress. We're really making progress. So we've treated first responders from 100 different departments at this point.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of those so far have been self-pay. People can get the treatments typically covered through their health savings accounts or flex spending accounts. So they're paying for them with funds that have been set aside. There's
Yeah.
lower taxes on the fund, you set aside for FSA or HSA. And the big move would be let's see if we can get workers' comp funds, which are plentiful and paying for things people often don't want and that don't bring them the results they need let's get those kinds of funds to cover the needs that people have. We've seen innovative groups rise up. I want to really cite, the Chicago Police Marines have been amazing. They have really strong leadership, and those are a group of Marine Corps veterans that serve in CPD, Chicago Police Department, and they've raised funds to treat like 15, 20 more people with the stellate ganglion block that we provide at Stella. And so they provide the funding. There's, 100 clubs. We've started to have conversations with them. We've started to have conversations with groups that fund through community-based organizations that support first responders. We have partnerships with Green Beret Foundation on the military side, with Special Forces Foundation, with organizations like For Love of a Veteran that raise funds to cover veterans, and they do so, as they can and as funds come in, which have been hard to get since the 2020. But we have a number of partnerships and orgs that have funded treatments for people. And so I think the big next move is to have private insurance companies
Mhm.
begin to cover those as more cost-effective, efficient ways to take care of people. But yeah, there's definitely been progress, and we're definitely moving in that direction.
Awesome. Um, One of the topics I wanted to ask about, just because I've never been able to find a whole lot of information on this, but was just death, reaction to it, how people process it. Uh, so when you work with people, and in your past, how do you teach people or tell them how to view death? Like, and maybe I'll kind of give a bit more context. So, as a first responder or military, you go into those situations, you're seeing people that or even on the other side of the line, you're seeing people, blown up, chopped to pieces. There's all kinds of things that happen. But you have these big traumatic events, or you just have a family member. Maybe you just find a family member who's passed away from old age. How do you teach people how to process death? Because it just seems like it can come in such a variety of ways, and it's inevitable. We're all going to end up there at some point. So I just wonder, like, how do you kind of internalize that? How do you process it?
Yeah, that is a really good question. And it goes back to that piece we talked about, the recent article in Police One as to why first responders have so many self destructive thoughts. And it's because they continually operate in the arena of life and death. Just like medical school students read about these diseases and start to feel like they have these diseases, um, the people that see constant life and death are going to have thoughts about life and death
Hmm.
continually. It's actually part of their path as a protector and defender. And so when people say things like, well, any of us could die at any point, we could get hit by a car, that really misses the point. That is completely different from people who have it in their face all the time. The sort of ability to understand, yeah, in the abstract, we're all going to die, is very, very different
Hmm.
from being faced with graphic images and actual death. And then how people die matters, right? There's no two traumas are the same, Nathan, because there's a lot of individual differences and factors that go into the trauma quotient for any given event.
Hmm.
For example, um, if you see somebody who is a colleague that has a beautiful family, that wants to live, that you're close to, that is somebody you look up to, and that person is murdered on the street by somebody, a criminal of some kind, taken out intentionally, which happens to police officers, that is a certain kind of rage and a certain kind of trauma around how they were killed versus, somebody dying in a literal accident. That can happen, in training or, in any kind of um, deployment, whether you're talking about military deployment or just the work that people do on the streets, there can be accidents that can happen. And so it's a tragedy, but it wasn't caused by human evil, for
Okay.
example. Um, then like whether it hits you in that place of vulnerability matters. So the death of a child, if you have a child
Yeah.
of that same age, right, is a huge trauma for people. The death of a dog has been the biggest trauma that a lot of my patients, warriors, have experienced because for them, a dog is like this pure loving being that there is no evil or malice in that dog. And when they are killed, on purpose or accidentally, that can be a big trauma. So
I think innocence comes in a lot, yeah, like a child or animals. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, right. The innocence with a child, the loss of that child's future, the impact on the families, the unnatural fact of losing, a child before they had time to really ripen and enjoy their life. All of those things matter. And then the sheer volume, I've worked with a lot of first responders who during 2020 and 2021 were out on casualty, recovery kind of sent out because nobody had heard from an elderly person. And so,
Hmm.
like, there was a particular beat that nobody wanted in my community where there was a retiree community of people that were aging. And there were multiple deaths when COVID happened. And
Yeah.
somebody would have to go in and find these bodies. Like, and so the sheer, sort of volume of it, like being choked by the volume of death is a real trauma. And I think one of the mistakes that departments make is not allowing the public to understand the volume and the nature of some of the traumas that police officers see. So, when they talk about, oh, here we're doing like a little lip syncing thing to get, the community to like identify with their police officers, it's like, yeah, no, like the gap in trust, the gap in connection that exists could be more fully mended if people could actually understand what you're faced with, what kinds of traumas you have to see every day. If our civilian, society.
Because people go through that too, right? They want to identify with you through some of the traumas, through some of those experiences. Not everybody's prancing around, like you said, lip syncing and doing things, but certainly people have had family members or friends or someone they know in their life die, and there's been traumatic events around that. And if they can identify with you as a police officer on scene, uh, maybe that's more of a powerful connection than whatever TikTok video is put out.
Yeah, I mean, trauma is a human universal. Everybody has trauma, and first responders have
Hmm.
hundreds of traumas, many more than a typical civilian. But if they don't talk about that with a level of vulnerability, then they become sort of deadened inside and they widen the gap between themselves and those they serve. One of the things that I really appreciate about Michael Segru that you interviewed is that when I worked with him on writing Relentless Courage, I interviewed him for each chapter. He was so brave.
Hmm.
And he didn't just talk about, here's the facts of what happened. He was so courageous around this is how it impacted me. And this is, as a human, how it impacted me. He did not take the easy path or kind of minimize the damage that was caused by all of the traumas that he saw. And, the things that we think would traumatize a person aren't always the ones that traumatize them. Sometimes it's not even the trauma of what happens. And this is a critical insight I want people to hear. Sometimes it's not even the trauma events, the exposure to death, for example, that is the trauma, but the administrative betrayal.
Yeah,
When you feel like you're part of a tribe and then,
that was a big part of the book too.
yeah, you feel abandoned or you feel betrayed by the people that said, we are family to you and we have your back. Like you can sustain a lot of trauma when the tribe holds strong, but when the tribe defects from having your back and makes you feel like you're the person who is an outsider, who doesn't belong, who is damaged in some unique way, and they, initiate procedures against you, whatever it is, internal investigations, internal affairs processes. That is often the bigger trauma
Yeah.
for many first responders than all of the traumas that they see. And I think that's a piece of the story that we really wanted to share because a lot of people resonate with that.
Yeah, I'm at, well, and I mean, organizations obviously aren't going to talk about that part, but you have to have individuals come out and talk about that. And that was one of the biggest things when I talked to Mike about his part in the book and his story. That was one of the biggest things that resonated with me. I work with our police association. I've also been a training officer, so I've dealt with a whole bunch of recruits, and that is one of the biggest things I've seen other members dealing with. I haven't experienced this so much myself, but I've definitely seen how other people are treated, and it's pretty crazy. I think one of the things that's missing for a lot of people in at least law enforcement is the camaraderie nowadays. And I know the thin blue line is a huge issue for some people, a lot of our critics, but I think that's what that kind of represents, is that camaraderie that's there, and that we have your back, not to do big cover-ups and let people get away with criminal acts. It's the piece, like, I have your back, I support you. And I think cops are the first ones to admit when they've made a mistake and take responsibility for a lot of things, because that's the type of people we are looking to hire. But yeah, I think it's just that camaraderie piece that's missing, saying, hey, we have your back, and standing by that, even when the optics aren't the greatest, but the story that's of what actually happened. So
Yeah,
I think organizations struggle with that.
they really do. The way that the press covers things or puts pressure on things is a factor, to be sure. But it is similar in the military. You can sustain a lot of trauma if you have a reference group that understands you.
Yeah.
And essentially, we're talking about a group of people that have the moral authority to say, that was really messed up and I get it. And we've got your back. In a situation that you can't read people's minds. You don't always know, what people's intent are. You have to make decisions in the flash of a moment. Your life may be at risk. Now, one of the big factors, I think, is that if you're making those decisions in high stakes scenarios from a body system that is not calm and under control, then things tend to go sideways a lot more than they would if you had control in your own body.
Okay.
And so that's why these treatments to reassert calm and control. In the Marine Corps, they call it the OODA loop.
Yeah.
So it's basically the concept of being able to perceive a threat and then keep your frontal lobes from going offline. You want to retain your executive functioning and think of options for responding that are based on your values. If you lose control in your body at a cellular level, your frontal executive functioning tends to go offline. You tend to be in primal threat response mode, and things tend to go sideways. So a piece of solving this is dealing with the biological injury from the accumulation of past traumas. But to your point, yeah, the other piece is having a tribe, a reference group that has the moral authority and that has the will to support you because they get it.
Yeah.
They've been there.
I think that was a big message that came through in the book, especially on the parts. I really like how you laid it out. So Mike would kind of give the version of his story, and then how it impacted him, and then you give the doc perspective and say, this is what's going on. This is why it's affecting you this way, and here's some ways to deal with that. So I thought it was one of the best books I've ever read, though, just the way it's laid out.
Thank you.
And I know the feedback from other people who've picked it up is the same. Like, they're all kind of blown away by this. I know we're coming up to the end of our time here. I think I got you for a couple minutes. I just want to ask you about the authoring. So do you find authoring is one of the better ways to get or to help people? Or do you prefer kind of the clinical side of things?
Well, yeah, I write. I'm a writer. Like above all
Yeah.
else, I'm a writer. And it's to me the best way to scale insights
Hmm.
is to write because you've got this thing where you've got all of these insights in the book. And so I hear often enough from people, the person I sat down with, the doctor I sat down with, they just asked me questions. They evaluated me. They scrutinized me. Maybe they, made some interpretations, but I didn't really hear what they really think
Yeah.
as a human, and so I hear that so often that I thought, let's try to create this new genre of really what does a doc really think? So, yes, Michael tells his story with such courage. That's, why we kind of landed on relentless courage is that it takes courage to heal from those kinds of injuries, a different kind of courage than it takes to hit the streets every day. I wanted to share my professional insights and my humanity as a doc that was somebody who came in and has come in for people in that trench of mental warfare and say, here are the insights you need. And we get, so many reviews and letters, and it's wonderful. It always makes my day when people place a review for the book that's heartfelt. What you'll see is hundreds of written reviews. These are not
Yeah.
just people going on saying 5 stars, on to the next thing in my day. These are people that are pouring their hearts out and saying, this saved my life, or it changed the way I view law enforcement. That was part of our goal is to really help civilians and people who support law enforcement and first responders to better understand them at the human level. So thank you for that compliment. It was, a year of my life to write that book. And I am so proud of the work that we did together on that. I'm proud of Michael's courage and what he shared. And I'm glad that it was that you enjoyed it so much and found value in it.
Yeah, definitely an impactful book. And yeah, I've read some of those reviews. Like you can definitely tell people are affected by it. So, just at the end of our time here, I want to give you a chance to just say how people can follow you and find your work. So, where's the best place to get a hold of that?
Yeah, there's a couple places. I would say for anything referring to Stella, the treatments for first responders that I believe have so much potential. It's www.stellacenter.com. If you want to access, I've developed an online master guide that's self paced and confidential to give people that really confidential third place to get the insights they need. That would be Shauna Springer, SHAUNA Springer.com. And for other information about my books and speaking and whatnot, it's DocShaunaSpringer.com for my kind of general big website. So
Awesome.
thank you for bringing me on and having this conversation.
Yeah, great. I'll say thanks for coming on. And if you just hang out for 1 second, I'll say bye offline,
Sure,
and we'll get you out of here. So, okay, thank you.
no problem.